This committee of the Waukesha Board of Education to order. First up is verification the meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Thank you very much. Next up under general business is opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone that has signed up to speak to the committee? No? Excellent. Moving on to action items. First up is motion to approve minutes as presented. You looking for a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Rod. Thank you, Mr. Koenig. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. Next up, under action items is approval of the 2023-2024 Students at Risk Plan. Welcome, Mark. Good evening. Good evening.
So,
Go ahead.
I know Mark's a familiar face, to everyone here, but for those of you watching, this is Mark Leonard, Director of Student Services. He's here to present information on the 2023-24 at-risk plan. And then given the information and discussion around the plan, we are potentially seeking approval of the plan tonight.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So you have the entire packet of the at-risk plan in the agenda. This is just a brief summary. And year over year, last year to this year, there are no changes. So the purpose is to meet the requirements of Wisconsin State Statute 118.153, which requires the board to approve the at-risk plan each year. Our plan is aligned with the state statute. We provide guidance to those team members at the various schools who utilize the process. And as I said, there are no changes for this year. And the data that we receive as a result of this at-risk plan is utilized to help us meet student needs through various interventions that are done at the sites. So in terms of who is at risk, we start looking at that at grade 5, all the way through their senior year. If students meet 2 or more of the following characteristics, they would be considered at risk. 1 or more years behind their age group in terms of high school credits attained, so that's just for the high schoolers. 2 or more years behind their age group in basic skill levels. Habitual truants is defined under state statute. Those students who have already become parents. Those students who, through the legal process, have been designated as an adjudicated delinquent, or 8th grade pupils who score in each subject area on the examination administered under 118.30 or 118.301, which we would consider to be the forward exam, was below basic, or 8th grade pupils who failed that public examination, or 8th grade students who were not promoted to the 9th grade. So if they meet 2 or more of those categories, they would be considered at risk. In terms of practice, I mean, frankly, if a student is a parent, they're oftentimes going to be worked with in a way that would be, I mean, we would consider them at risk, just not through this formal process. But in terms of interventions that the student would start receiving, I would certainly think it would be very much the same. So in terms of the intervention practices, the first part is identification, which we do through the process. Parents are notified via letter of the designation that the student is at risk. Teachers and the student services staff determine those interventions with the student's parents through a problem-solving team meeting. Those interventions can include all sorts of things, but here's a short list summary. Things such as English learners programs, dual language programs, our alternate ed programs, including eAchieve, EAST, the GED Option 2 program, our competency-based program, Challenge Academy, which is done through Fort McCoy, that's a state program, the GED and HSED programs, which are administered through the technical colleges. Students can also qualify for a 504 or an individualized education program. So those are just a few of the many interventions that our staff utilize when a student's designated as at risk. One of the things that we do for all students, but becomes a point of focus for students on the at-risk plan, is those transitional needs from 5th to 6th grade, so from elementary to middle school, and then also from middle school to high school. Each student is reevaluated each year. So they're evaluated annually. Those who are found to be at risk by statute are considered to be at risk through graduation. However, there are plenty of times where students sort of turn things around for various reasons, and parents do get updated with that information as the process goes forward. Success of interventions is measured by criteria from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Those students who maintained a 70% attendance rate or greater, those who remained in school, those who've graduated, those who have earned 4.5 credits or more per year prorated, students who have demonstrated on standardized tests such as passing grade levels in math or English language arts, a gain in reading and math commensurate with the duration of his or her enrollment in the program, or have earned a passing grade in reading, language arts, and math. Year over year, you can see the graph is kind of backwards, but the most recent year is all the way on the left. But you can see our at-risk numbers are declining. Now, you might wonder why. So I did a little bit of digging, and one of the things that I think actually is helping us pretty significantly is attendance. So for example, just a few little statistics for you right now. We're currently sitting at a 94.91 attendance rate, which is, we'd certainly like it to be 96 or 98, but we're not ringing the alarm bells just yet. Our chronic absenteeism is actually down 7% from the 21-22 school year. Now, of course, 2021, why are the numbers so goofy that year? Well, you can guess. We weren't looking at things like truancy during the 2021 school year. But since then, attendance has improved. Right now, just a few little quick facts. We currently have 3,061 students in the district who have no absences. We have another 3,739 students who have 1 or 2 absences on week 13 or 14 of school. And we have an additional 1,226 students with 2 to 3 days of absence. So the work that is being done on attendance, I believe, is helping. Who does that work? Well, psychologists do that work. Social workers do that work. School counselors do that work. Administrative teams do that work. And parents do that work. So those are the types of things that I think are helping to drive down these numbers bit by bit, year over year. I could also speak to the work that's being done on the teaching and learning side with the guaranteed and viable curriculum and some of the progress that we're seeing in that area as well. So overall, some good news. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. This is great information, and that's great news, both on the declining at-risk students and the improvement in attendance. I did have a question around dropouts. And maybe this applies to chronic absenteeism as well, probably just dropouts. Do we look for dropouts among all school-age children who reside within the district but may not attend an SDW school? So in other words, perhaps a student has open enrolled out to Kettle Moraine. Would we know, and would we do any intervention with a student like that, or perhaps a charter school that is within our boundaries?
We would know only if that school were to notify us. For example, when a student states that they're going to withdraw from our school district to attend another school, for example, if we do not receive a notice or a request of records from that other school in a timely fashion that sort of tells us that that student has actually enrolled, we would then be reaching out to the family and saying, excuse me, you said you were going to go to, let's say, Kettle Moraine.
Right.
We haven't received a records request from them at this time. We need to receive that in order to say that you are no longer our student.
So, but in the situation where Kettle Moraine gets the records, the student
Yep.
was enrolled.
Yep.
Once that happens, that becomes KM's responsibility to monitor and correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That does actually come up, though. I mean, you're on the right track. I mean, we have situations like that, and our staff are on top of it.
Okay. In those situations where And I guess, so I'm assuming open enrollment is an annual thing. So student open enrolls to KM as a freshman. We expect them to then open enroll again as a sophomore, or is there an assumption that they are enrolled at KM until they return back to the district?
There's an assumption they're enrolled in KM unless they return to us, which, for example, if the student were to become habitually truant in Kettle Moraine could say, you're habitually truant, you need to go back to your home school district.
Got it.
We would then be notified by Kettle Moraine of that,
Okay,
and they would make that, we would then pick that student up.
thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Mr. Zenobia?
Yes, thank you. So I'm just curious what the number of students is, once they're identified as at risk. I know there's a lot of variables of them maybe going somewhere else, but of that portion identified, how many, do you have a sense of how many actually graduate or how many make it through then?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, I would have to take a look at the numbers to see if those students who are at risk are making it out. That's something we could certainly research.
Yeah, be curious.
Yeah.
And, you know, the attendance data you had was great, very, very encouraging, so
Yep.
that's excellent.
Yep. I will say, you know, the number of alternative programs and the number of options for students as they get closer to graduation has increased, and I believe is helping with that overall dropout situation. Just a quick example is, and this is really a statewide thing, but it also helps us locally here in Waukesha. eAchieve currently is offering a competency program that allows students to graduate from high school through a competency degree. That was because people were coming to us from far afield to say, we have this need and we can't fill it ourselves. Can you, eAchieve, do that? And Jason and the team at eAchieve took that on last year and said, yes, we'll fill that role. And so they are pulling students from across the state to complete their high school diploma through the competency program. But it also benefits us as well when you have a situation where a student, you know, in a very sort of non-traditional way cannot attend school on a day-to-day basis.
Any other questions? Mr. White?
Yeah, so kind of to dovetail off that, I noticed an identification of either an HSED or a GED. What is the difference? And what would be the, from a student perspective, who would choose GED versus HSED?
Those programs are typically handled by the technical colleges, so WCTC would do that. Those are for students who have their cohort has graduated. So
Okay.
imagine a 19-year-old, for
Yep.
example. We do not allow students to complete, or the state does not allow students to complete through a traditional GED or HSED until their cohort has graduated.
Okay,
But that is that something that we would support and assist in? Absolutely. You know, we oftentimes have 19, 20, 21-year-old adults who come back to the enrollment office and say, look, I never finished.
right.
How can I go about doing that? And so it's a matter of us having the correct information to provide them with and then giving them that pathway to the technical college to complete. In terms of the differences between the GED and the HSED, that really comes down to the requirements
Okay.
of each.
But I'm assuming in either case, it is an equivalency of a high school diploma, like, which is probably the key takeaway, right?
And either one would help, I believe, in a job market situation.
Sure. So what, for those that graduate from our alternative school, what is, I was always under the impression that was a GED they were earning. Is that not correct?
No, they're earning a Waukesha.
Traditional diploma?
There are multiple pathways. For example, East High School, our alternative school.
Yep.
Has a pathway that does not require as many credits as a student at one of our 3 traditional schools would have. That doesn't mean that the credits are different, the requirements are very similar.
Got
So, in terms of, you know, the benchmarks that they are meeting, but the overall number of credits is different.
Right. I don't want to step in front of anyone that might have questions, but if
going.
they don't, okay. Would it be possible for you to bring that chart back up?
Sure. It's, yeah, it's possible for Michelle to do it.
Anything's possible, Michelle.
Okay, so this is, I'm assuming, a key metric for us, right? Just seeing how many are at risk at the various levels. Do we know how this compares to other districts, either neighboring us or similar in size? Is that data available to us so we know how we're comparing to other similar districts?
I don't know, I don't have that data. I don't know if other districts would make this data public necessarily.
Right.
In the way that I just did. I don't know that they're required to do that under the statute. It's just the plan needs to be approved by the board. It doesn't say that they have to put this out publicly.
Right, okay. So in terms of other metrics that we would be looking carefully at, I'm assuming obviously the number at risk who eventually graduate, do we track that? Like, do we have data that tells us on, for any student that's at some point been identified as at risk, how many of them graduated?
They're
And-
flagged in IC as at risk, so there would be a way to track that. I don't have those numbers in front.
Okay, okay, I'll follow up on that later. What are some of the other key metrics that folks, the teams look at to make a determination as to whether any particular intervention or group of interventions are working or maybe need to be tuned or,
Well, for this particular one, attendance is a big one.
right?
The pass rate on the state exams is another. High school credits is another. I mean, if you look at, take a quick look at the chart, you can see that the vast majority of the students that are being identified are doing so in high school.
Right.
And that's more a factor of credits earned than it is the state testing, because we really don't do the state testing in the same way at the high school as we do at the elementaries and middle schools. So, that is really where we're focused on. And I'll tell you, in some cases, especially as a student gets closer to graduation, those are day-to-day conversations with a
Yeah.
student about making up their credits that they're missing.
Right.
So,
So I don't recall us having any KPIs as a part of our, more global KPI set that we track and show online. Do we have any KPIs around at-risk students? Okay,
just this plan.
right, okay. Final question, and then I'll turn it over. Is it fair to say that attendance is the single most important factor in terms of ensuring that an at-risk student succeeds, or is
I
that
don't
not
have
true?
an evidence-based metric to back that up. I don't disagree with you, however. I mean,
Okay.
when we talk at the sites with the student services staff, so psychs, social workers, school counselors, administrators,
Mm-hmm.
that is oftentimes the key indicator that a student is falling behind, is just they're not in school.
Right, okay,
Yeah. And they do a lot of very good work, including things all the way up to home visits, in our relationship with the Waukesha Police Department in terms of truancy.
yep,
Yeah,
great. Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it.
thank you.
I just want to add on to what David said. David, I think you're right, there is a lot, when it comes to, these kinds of improvements, of just making kids feel connected, and it's obvious, looking at the data, in 5 years' time, we've cut this number more than in half, across the board, and to me, it is all about just that sense of connectedness and just trying to find ways to support all different situations that kids are, encountering.
Agreed.
But it's amazing, looking at the data, in 5 years' time, you're literally, it's less than half of what it was. So whatever we're doing is clearly, some wonderful stuff. And kids obviously do feel connected because, we are keeping them, they are coming. And that's 3/4 of the battle, to get them to come,
We-
be present.
Yeah, was there something significant that changed between 1819 and 1920 in terms of the way that we address attendance that would explain that precipitous drop? Is there something that we know we did that helped?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
weren't here.
that's fair.
Hybrid.
Okay.
I mean,
It's tough to be truant from a hybrid.
I do think that there was a renewed focus on student services as a whole.
Right.
And the efforts of those staff and making sure that those staff were in the right places at the right times.
Right.
I do remember that, maybe you remember that, Diane, around that time though, there was a renewed and more rigorous focus on, connecting with the, students and recognizing at-risk students and kind of wrapping around them a little bit more. It was about that time. So maybe that was something that made the difference too.
Diane,
So do we need a motion for approval of this?
I do have a question.
Oh, you have a
before
question?
Yeah.
first? Okay.
So when a student gets an IEP, do they come off that list at risk? Because they go,
No, once
Okay.
they're identified as at-risk, they stay on the
They
list.
stay on the
until
list.
Graduation.
regardless, they get an IEP, a 504, or anything, okay,
The parents, of course, are updated along the way as
Right.
to the progress that's being made,
right.
but that designator stays there.
Once you get it, it's
Yeah.
regardless of what.
Yep.
Okay. And then do we still offer the remedial classes at summer school to help? We do, we offer that?
Yeah, we have, yep.
Do we have a credit recovery program still?
Mm-hmm.
Where we will send them
We have credit recovery programs at each of the high schools.
at each of the high schools? Okay,
In addition to East.
yes, okay. They're not just
or
concentrated at East. We don't,
No, students do not have to leave their home high school in
Okay.
order to access credit recovery.
okay.
That predates me as well, but.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I truly believe that that's something that is very helpful.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah, why pull them out of their school?
Yep.
They're already struggling. Diane?
I do have a question. Is the school-age parent program available still in any way, shape, or form?
There are a number of programs through the county that the social workers are aware of
Through the county.
that assist school-age parents, yes. Yep. And then, of course, that's where we tailor our interventions to meet the needs of that student.
Do we still send the student age parents to a different school like we used to?
No,
We don't. They can stay at their,
yes.
because that used to be
A thing.
a thing.
Yep, nope, we meet their needs
Okay.
where they are as long as that's what they want. I
Alrighty.
mean, there are some
Right.
students where their unique situation doesn't allow them to attend a brick and mortar school.
Right.
But that's where we would have things like our online credit recovery programs, our e-achieve program, shortened days. I mean, there are things that we will do to address those needs.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mark? Alrighty, now I'll be looking for a motion.
I move that we approve the 2023-24 Students at Risk Plan without any changes.
Thank you, Mrs. Voigt. Is there a
Second.
second? Mr. Zenobia, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a
for
good
your
evening.
time. You as well.
Thank you, Mark, and the rest of the team that works with you around that. Up next, we're going to move
Yeah.
into the role of school psychologist.
Perfect. I love it.
So while the team comes up, I'll do a little brief introduction.
No. What is that, the keys?
Oh, look at
Is
this.
it?
I'm not going to introduce the Bedloves.
Right, exactly. I feel like I know them all now.
Ashkenaz graduates.
Well, thanks for the little humor break. With us tonight, we have Jamie Kupkovitz, who is the Director of Academic Student Services, to share more about the highly impactful work that our group of school psychologists do throughout the district. Jamie works most closely with the school psychologists. She herself has served as a school psychologist in past. Part of this presentation tonight is the first of many series. As far as student services, we will be bringing you tonight the role of a school psychologist. In the future, we'll be bringing you a presentation regarding the role of a school counselor, the role of a social worker. So just to be a little bit more familiar with all the positions, as well as who does what, because we often refer to our student services teams, but this will give everyone an opportunity to really understand the role themselves. So tonight, without further ado, we'll learn a little bit more about the role of the school psychologist, and Jamie will introduce the team that's with her.
All right, thank you, Jen, for that introduction. So I have two of our school psychologists who have graciously volunteered to present for you tonight. So I have Andrea Taylor, who is a school psychologist at Bethesda and also helps us with bilingual evaluations in the district. And I also have Stephanie Merrill, who is a school psychologist at Summit View. So I'm going to turn it over to them as they go over the role of the school psychologist and how the school psychologist operates in Waukesha School District.
You'll have to speak close to it, too.
So school psychologists serve a wide variety of roles in the schools. One of our main jobs is working collaboratively with teams to complete psychoeducational evaluations for students suspected of having disabilities who may require an IEP or a Section 504 plan. But that's just one part of what we do. We also provide direct support and interventions to students. We consult with teachers, families, and other school-employed mental health professionals like counselors, school social workers, just to improve those interventions and support strategies for students. We work with our administrators on the school-wide practices and policies that are in place. And then we also collaborate with community providers and coordinated needed services for students.
So through our work, our ultimate goals are to improve academic achievement, promote positive behavior and mental health, support diverse learners, create safe, positive school climates, strengthen family-school partnerships, and improve school-wide assessment and accountability.
To give you an idea of what training we receive very specialized training in graduate studies of school psychology. So we typically have our specialist level or our doctoral degree in order to practice as a school psychologist. So that typically is a master's plus about 45 credits, so at least 60 graduate semester hours. And then we also complete a year-long 1,200 hours supervised internship. So that's an idea of the training we go through. Many of us are also accredited by the National Association of School Psychologists and also have our National Certification in School Psychology, or NCSP. So we have a lot of acronyms, letters after our names.
So what does this look like in Waukesha? So we have 18 full-time school psychologists employed and 2 are bilingual. Each elementary school has 1 full-time school psychologist. Each secondary school has at least 0.5 FTE school psychologists. So they'll serve between multiple schools or sites. We also service early childhood, Head Start, and all Waukesha private schools.
So within the district, as we talked about our roles, we include a variety of district-wide responsibilities. So we do committee work, we create and provide trainings to staff, and also prevention and outreach to families. Within the buildings, we lead problem-solving team meetings. We serve on the building leadership team. We complete special education and 504 evaluations. We do crisis response. We participate in universal screening team meetings looking at school-wide and individual student data. We help with progress monitoring of students who are in interventions to make sure that the interventions are working. We provide social emotional instruction and mental health support for students, and then we consult and collaborate with staff and families.
Thank you, Andrea. Any questions? 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 Questions
So who are we? There's all of our faces, and we also have some of our team members here tonight that were available to support us, so.
All right, are there any questions for our school psychologist? Mr. Zenobia?
Yes, well, thank you all for being here this evening. So I was just curious, I know you do service outside the district as well, and I was just wondering, what kind of workload is that off of the time that you have here? I mean, percentage-wise, I mean, your day is obviously, I would assume, mostly here, but you have other responsibilities, and what does that look like? I mean, with your time spent both outside the district and...
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the referrals that we receive from the private schools, from Head Start. So it varies greatly depending on the year, depending on what referrals we receive.
As a percentage of, just, I don't know, maybe half the year, the whole year, whatever. I mean, I'm just asking for just kind of just a basic guess, or,
I have a better idea.
I mean, it's more of a time thing and how that plays out.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So like Drea is saying, so it can depend from year to year.
Sure.
I will say this year we are experiencing a higher number of referrals from our area private schools. So that is adding some extra time to what school psychologists are doing currently.
Has there been an uptick in, I don't know, I guess I would, call it workload since the pandemic? I mean, have you as psychologists seen some of the after effects of that on the students and families, and that has required more of your time, or,
Yes.
Yes, and I think since I've been in the district now, I think 7 years, and since my first year, it's gone up every single year, but after the pandemic, it was pretty significant, especially with the number of evaluations that we're completing is quite dramatic.
Number of evaluations as well as student mental health needs. We've definitely seen an uptick in that also.
does that continue to seem like it's climbing? Has it leveled off or gone down in any areas? Or it just
My
continues to go
opinion
up?
is that it seems to be climbing.
Agreed, yeah.
don't have any
We don't have
numbers to
data
back it
or
up.
numbers,
Yeah.
I know,
but
there's- I-
our
Good question.
gut
So
feeling.
that is something that I do keep track of. So I watch our referrals that are coming in. And I'll take a snapshot. I do have some data that was left for me prior to stepping into the role, which does indicate that our referrals are higher than they have been in the year prior. And then in the year prior. So yes, over time, they are increasing as we see an increased need for some of our students.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, thank you. So I kind of want to work off Mr. Zenobia's questions as well. So in terms of the referrals that we're seeing, are there particular areas that we've seen an increase in, like specific types of referrals that has significantly changed in the last 2 to 3 years or longer, if that were the case?
Sure, yeah, the increase in referrals, what we're seeing, we are seeing an uptake of like what would be considered other health impairment. So oftentimes those are, when we see behaviors like attention and focusing, students who have trouble with those types of behavior, concentration. So we're seeing an increase with those types of referrals, as well as we continue to see academic or learning needs. So specifically when we look at the area of reading, that continues to be an area where we do quite a bit of evaluation.
Do you all have any sense as to what's driving that? Is there anything in particular that seems to be sort of a root cause for some of these increases in these areas that you're seeing referrals in?
Yeah, I do still think we are battling some of the effects of some of the loss of learning that has occurred. And we're starting, I mean, we're looking at, if we look at like the data across, those numbers are starting to come back as far as like to those regular level of achievement, but we're still seeing that group of students, still had a significant loss of learning. So we're seeing those needs still being present.
Sure. What about in the real early grades? Maybe those kids who weren't in school during that, first year or year and a half where, we had the hybrid, well, I guess none of our elementary students went through that, but just some of the challenges that families had during that time that maybe some of those kids weren't in school yet. Do we
Sure.
see sort of a return to normal in maybe some of the younger age groups? Are we seeing an increase in referrals there compared to pre-pandemic?
Yeah, I think those continue to be a little bit higher, those early grades, especially when we look at kindergarten. It was oftentimes when we have kids who are first coming into school, takes a little bit of a while sometimes for them to transition, but we are still seeing, referrals in those earlier grades.
Yeah. And then I guess my final question around referrals is the increase in referrals, has that impacted you and your team's ability to focus on other key areas of your, day-to-day responsibilities and, maybe what is, where are we finding a time or resource challenge as a result of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you guys could see from the presentation, so our school psychologists wear many hats, and they are very skilled in many different areas. And so like data analysis, progress monitoring for interventions. But with the increased referrals, yes, that does take a majority of their time. So that does pull them away from being able to do some of those other things that were mentioned in the presentation, because those evaluations do come with timelines and need to be completed in a timely manner. So those do end up taking precedent over some of those other areas and skills that they're very highly trained and developed in, that we want to make sure that they're
Right.
still able to do.
Right. Last thing, and then I'll let someone else jump in. So I recall before I got on the board, I seem to recall a discussion, it may have been in student services, or maybe it was in teaching and learning, around gifted and talented. And as I recall, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I seem to recall that there were at least some number of the school psychologists who were involved in actually doing the evaluations around gifted and talented. And I think there were some concerns raised that those may be responsibilities that aren't real well aligned to someone in a school psychologist role. Is that still happening today? And has there been any discussion around how we might be able to transition that to another area where it would be better suited to get that off the plate of the school psychologist so they can focus more on those either increase in referrals or areas that are part of their core responsibilities that may not be getting the attention that they could?
Sure. Yeah, and gifted and talented, so that is something that I'm looking more into. So that area does fall under some of the tasks and roles. So that has been something that I've been gathering some information as I've come into the district. So our school psychologists are involved in the initial identification. So as part of, especially for if there's a student who we have an interest in knowing if there's an intellectual strength. So school psychologists are the only ones who are trained to be able to give an intellectual assessment or
Okay.
cognitive assessment.
Okay.
So they are involved in the initial identification of students who may qualify for gifted and talented services.
Okay.
It just means that their work spans from, concerns of students not, needing support to students needing advancement. That's just the other side, rather than separating it. Their role is really in the assessment piece.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much.
And I know how many hats you all wear because I've watched it for over 30 years, and I've had the pleasure of working with a few of you. But it is amazing, the different things that you're pulled into. If there's a crisis situation, you're one of the first one, no matter what you're doing. If you're testing a student, you're doing other things, you're pulled into that situation, on a moment's notice. You're involved in, all of the activities, and when it comes to just, fun programs and things, within the school, you're just there. So you definitely have a lot of hats that you wear. And, I don't know where we'd be without our fantastic, psychologists, because you guys are an integral part of every school. I wish every school had one full-time. I know some have to share, and that's always been for me, I feel, something that should be examined because the need is great. And you all just do so much, so thank you to all of you.
Just how many positions are unfilled? Are they all currently filled?
They are all currently
Oh,
filled.
okay. I should.
There was a slide that showed like how many per,
Yep.
for the whole district.
Okay.
Yeah, we are very fortunate to have those positions filled. They're often hard to find with really good quality people, let alone experience at different levels and different languages.
Thank you.
Mrs. Voigt?
I just want to thank you all for taking the time to come and give us those insights, because it really helps us to understand the great work that you're doing. And thank you very much for the hard work that you do put in for all of our students.
Alrighty, any other questions? I'd like to remind everybody that the amount of school psychologists we have right now was greatly reduced at one time, so this was a
Great.
great effort by the school board and the administration to get this many school psychologists back into Waukesha, because we cut it drastically many years ago. So it's great to see that we have this many supporting our students.
And I would say kudos to the team. They're all very collaborative and support each other. There's a larger number of referrals, but they're all jumping in and supporting each other. And so kudos to the team for working so well together and just having such a positive, reputation throughout the district and throughout the schools.
Excellent. Thank you very much for taking the time. Good to see you. All right. Next up under the discussion information items is open enrollment survey results. There we go. This is,
All right, so I'm not gonna, thank you everyone for being here.
thank you all.
I'm not gonna introduce the Bedlaw family again, so we'll just get. So we will just get right into the open enrollment survey. So in past years, there was a survey sent to families who had open enrolled out of the district. From the information gathered, the survey was given a few times in previous years, but not part of any larger continuous improvement process. And so today, I'll share the information about the survey, information about the results, and then how that feeds into our continuous improvement process around this topic. During the summer months, it was also a board request that a survey be conducted again. So tonight, like I said, I'll share more about that. So the survey itself, one of our first steps prior to deploying the survey is we wanted to take a look at the survey questions and really how the survey was deployed in the past. One of the decisions I made early on was that I wanted to change the format from a Google survey to using Qualtrics, which is a more robust data analytics survey tool. So here's a snapshot of the survey where you can easily access it on your phone. I feel like our high participation, the participation rate was increased because of that phone accessibility. You know how it is. You get the email and you're like, oh, I'll just click here and and there you've participated in the survey. So that was some of the steps that I've taken prior to deploying the survey, and felt that moving the platform would allow us some better data analytics. As I reviewed the questions, I asked things, looked at the questions with wonderings around, is this information we're gathering actionable and something that we can actually use? Have we used it before? And then looking at the results, I'll share a little bit of how I modified some of the questions, but some are pretty much the same. I do want to say special thanks to Brian Yearling. He's one of our instructional technology coordinators. He really is a leader with the use of Qualtrics and dashboards and has been my partner with so many things data. So he's not here tonight, but he was a big support in making all this data come to life. So the process that we took for the open enrollment survey was to revise the survey, like I had shared earlier, send out communication to the open enrolled families, and I have a few stats for you. I was talking with David about this before. I said, don't quote me on the numbers, but here are the numbers. So we have 792 students who are open enrolled out of the district. That equates to 545 families. Of the communication surveys that were sent out to those families, we had 101 survey responses. We gave everyone about 2 weeks, offered multiple reminders, again, using that mobile app and mobile click technology that it was easy for them to participate. And then I took some time to summarize the themes of the data, and then today is really about reporting out. We've talked about this as a cabinet level, and so after tonight, we'll go back to the cabinet and talk a little bit more about the action steps. So one of the questions on the survey is really around how long have you lived in the school district of Waukesha? And here you can see that 45% lived in the district for 10 years or more. And 42% of them have lived in the district for 5 to 10 years. So most of them who are enrolling out have been in the district for longer term rather than less than a year or 1 to 2 years. We did not have that data available in previous surveys, and so I'm not able to compare that to past years, but that's where, using a different platform, we're able to analyze the data a little bit differently. One of our other questions focused on how families who are open enrolled out get information. Here you can see on this chart that 30% of the people who responded to the survey get their primary information from friends and neighbors, 16% with the district mailings, 9%, almost 10% on the district website, and then you also have other newspaper, school newsletters, and then also social media. In looking at the data, one thing we want to do moving forward is using the data. I want to point out that the district mailings, the district website, social media, and school newsletter, those, when you calculate those total percentages, that's almost half of the overall. And those are things that we have control over. Compared to friends and neighbors, that's about 30%. So as we move forward, we would likely have a strategic action focused around that. I looked back at previous results, and it was, it was about 30% then, about friends and neighbors. So very similar responses when it comes to the information over time.
John, I have a question about the 792 students. Are those students that attended Waukesha? Because there are obviously some students that never attended Waukesha, they just open a roll for parents to have a job. Are those included?
There is anyone open enrolled out right now.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and dig a little deeper as far as which ones came and left versus which ones never came.
Yeah, because we might not know that, right? Would we know if they lived in the district and then just never went to 4K here or?
It would take some time to
Yeah.
dig and see if they enrolled in 4K or 5K. It would take some time, but
Yeah, I would
it's
have to think
anyone right now open enrolled out.
Okay, and then that 792 does not include students that go to private schools or parochial schools within the district boundaries, or does it?
Not within the district.
Okay.
Anyone out, like a different public school.
Okay, just public schools.
Yeah. So my point here was just using this data, looking at it to say, how can we use this in our strategic actions moving forward? It's similar to years past. So that's just something to note. That's one of the recommendations I'll make is just some of the data is very similar, so I would not recommend an annual survey at this time, but we can talk about that in next steps. One of the questions that we asked was focused on, did you plan to enroll in Waukesha based on whether you've lived here a short time or a long time. And you can see here, it's broken down to about a third each. They did plan to enroll, they didn't, or they were undetermined when they moved into the district. This data is also similar to previous data. So this is a similar question that we asked, and again, it's similar. So about a third, and a third. For us, in looking at this, it's really thinking about those undetermined at the time, seeing if we can persuade those families to either consider or reconsider. And then also the people that, were no's, maybe we would just need to give them more information. But again, it's broken down to a third. These results are similar to past years. One of the questions focused on, do you or have you felt welcomed in the district? This question was on the previous surveys. This is one of the questions I changed the format. In looking at the previous question, it was on a scale of strongly agree, neutral or no opinion, disagree, strongly disagree. With that option of neutral, no opinion, we had just as many who had neutral, no opinion as anything else. And so that really left me with data that I couldn't take action on. And so what we did is we changed the format of the question to really force a response. So here what we're doing is we're looking at the percentage of responses that rated their feeling of welcome between 0 and 6, with the idea that potentially our strategic actions would lead to a decrease of families feeling that they weren't welcomed, or increasing a rating of 9 or 10.
So just so I understand, so the majority of the responses, they selected between 0 and 6. Is that how I?
Yep, 56% of the responses put us between 0 and 6, which on a scale of 0 to 10, from a net promoter data perspective, would put us in probably more not so favorable, where a rating of 9 or 10 would be very favorable.
So just another quick question, I'm sorry interrupting. So say that a family moves into our district from Kettle Moraine, but they leave their kids at Kettle Moraine. What does that look like on our open enrollment? Because Kettle Moraine would require them to open enroll.
Wait, say that again, they leave
So a family
different
moves from
district.
Kettle Moraine to Waukesha, our attendance area, but they leave their children at Kettle Moraine. What does that look like? Because-
So they would have to, if they move into our district boundaries.
Right.
Then they would have to open enroll out of Waukesha to the other district.
To Kettle Moraine.
Upon that next year, or.
Okay.
Depending on the timing.
If they told them they moved,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, if they
Because
moved into
if-
here.
Yeah, okay. Because the graph before this one, was that focused on people who move into the district? This one right here.
This is all about family. Everything here is about current families, not where
Because it
they
says
live
when
in the
moving
district.
here.
They live in the district boundaries.
Yes.
But this is their intent of if they were going to enroll out.
Okay.
From the start. So a third said, yep, we're going to move here even though we're not going to go to school here.
Okay.
A third were like, I wasn't sure. And a third were like, no.
Understand.
Isn't this fun?
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah. So some of the themes,
I'm sorry, Jen, just one quick question. I just want to make sure that I understood your answer to Mr. McCaffrey earlier. So the survey was sent only to students that have open enrolled outside of the school district of Waukesha. So we didn't send this to, say, students that went to charter schools that are within the district, like perhaps families that chose Mill Creek, or that choose Catholic Memorial, or perhaps chose another private school, like the Catholic, the K-8 Catholic school system. We haven't surveyed them, is that correct? They're not included in these numbers?
on the spot, now you're making me second guess
I'm
myself.
sorry. I was just wondering if, because we have that, we should have that information.
Let me just clarify.
okay.
Off the top of my head with everything, I don't know, a little distracted too.
That's fine.
Noise.
I would think that the answers might differ significantly depending upon whether they went to, say, another public school, or they chose a charter school that has a specific curriculum, or a parochial school that has a,
And I can't speak to it now, but we did ask what school they're going to, and I just didn't bring that forward
Okay.
here as a theme, but I can always share more about that. So just give me a
That's fine.
hot minute to go
all right,
back.
thanks.
Okay, so as communicated in the initial deployment of the survey to families is that we would, talk about the themes of the open enrollment survey. And really, we asked families what was the number one reason why families open enrolled out for them specifically. This was an open-ended question, and then what we did is we went through and looked for those themes and then bulked them together in categories. And so location and then academics in other districts were two of the biggest reasons why as the first reason. When asking for another reason, additional top reasons, again, this was open-ended. So if they maybe said location in the first one, they maybe said size in the second one. So the second reasons that were coming up, those themes were location, again, academics in other districts, size, and that could be positive and negative. Like, I'm not saying it's like size of our district, I'm just saying size. It could be size anything. It just is their
I'm
response.
sorry, point of personal privilege. Could we have somebody ask the folks outside the room to perhaps take their conversations elsewhere? I'm finding it distracting. I don't know if anyone else is. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. So size, and then, so if their response had anything to do with the size of any system or us or them, it got lumped into size. And then the positive view of other districts is a theme that emerged. So like we had said, we would share the themes. We've talked about these at cabinet, and like I said, we would come back and have more of a conversation around what we've learned. And some of the things that we learned really is that academic benefits, and that communication. For us, how do we tie these things together and share all the really good things that we are doing? Just like tonight, like the school psychologist, everything that you heard tonight, like how do we promote that and share that, throughout? And then intentionally using our mailings, our website, and then our social media, because we know that when we use all those things together, that can equate to over half the way that all families are getting information. And then just spreading more of a positive news about, what we have going on in the district. As far as next steps, based on the survey results, we may want to get additional feedback or information from some of the participants. We haven't made some final decisions around that, but the idea would be, if they said size and we wanted to look more into that size was a factor, then I may say, hey, this came up. Let's have a listen and learn session. Tell me what you mean about that. What is the size? Is it that we're too big, they're too small? We don't, so we might want to seek additional information and feedback and input from any of the families who are currently open enrolled out. And then the other part is really, next step is to collaborate with the cabinet team to develop some strategic actions and deploy them. Obviously, this would, be the work with support with communications and, not just student services, but our whole district as a whole. My recommendation really is to survey open enrolled families again in fall of 25, 26. As you saw, some of the data was very similar from past years, so I wouldn't expect that to change just overnight. So that would give us time to deploy some strategies and, kind of see where we're at and see if some of those strategies worked, and then come back and share a little bit more.
Mrs. Zenobia.
Just a real quick comment, maybe suggestion would be, and maybe this doesn't have to wait for the open enrollment survey the next time, but maybe a question of, why, what would make you reconsider Waukesha? Just curiosity of maybe more information as to what might lure these families back. But overall, great presentation, a lot of good information, so thank you.
Mrs. Voigt?
I think that there might be a need to actually do it again sooner, especially with only an 18% response rate. We may see a similar data from year to year, but that's, a big chunk of people that haven't responded. That I would like to see like a higher response rate before we'd skip a year. Just my thought.
Anything else, Mr. Watt?
Yeah, so thanks to you and your team, Ms. Gunderman. I think this is a great start in helping us to start to understand where we may need to focus in order to make the district more attractive or help people understand better the benefits of going here. One of the things I'd be curious about, I suspect, since I didn't see any of this data in here, that we didn't ask it, but maybe you did and it just wasn't included with this presentation. Do we have any sense of, for the number of people, from the people who did respond, how many of them had their kids in SDW and then chose to open and roll them out after they'd already had students in the district?
I'd have to do a little bit more digging. That's what we talked about earlier with if they started and then open and rolled out versus they never came. And
Yeah.
let's say one of the location reasons, let's say they work in somewhere else and they just open and roll their students right where they work.
Right.
So I'd have to do a little bit more digging around that.
And if it's possible to locate it, if not, maybe this is a question for a future survey. Is there a specific point in time in the academic progression where we're starting to see students leave, right? Like, is it when they're entering middle school, fourth grade, high school? I'd be very curious to know if there's a particular point in time at which parents that these parents have decided that SDW no longer fits their needs, or they perceive it doesn't.
Yeah, like in a transition year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, just trying to write my notes.
I know, well, yeah. There's a lot of detail that you could.
I mean, I would expect this is going to be a survey that will continue to evolve over time, right? As we identify potential areas to focus on, we're going to want to see how we're doing in those areas, right? So, and I would think we'll identify all kinds of areas that we might want to learn more about from parents. And to be honest with you, I would like to see us, and this is off topic a little bit, but it's related. I'd like to see us start surveying families that choose to enroll their students in the district that may not be district residents, and what's driving them. Does it? Because that might help us in terms of marketing to to district families, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know what the data will tell us, but that might be interesting to learn about as well.
Any other questions or comments? Excellent, thank you very much, lot.
Thanks. So we're
Moving into some policy work here?
yes.
Yes. Policy 5113, open enrollment program. It's a good segue into that, huh?
Yeah, we thought they worked together. So tonight, what we have is discussion around this policy for open enrollment. And welcome to the Bedlows again. I got it.
You guys had a good time.
I got it. I got it.
I've closed everything. Go away.
Well, now a few more people have met the Bedlaw family, so we like to have a little bit of fun in student services. So following our conversation about open enrollment, we have the open enrollment program policy. This is being brought forward just as part of the Neola updates, just in the general progression of, Dr. Siebert hands out about 18 policies to people in groups, and this is one of them that I got, so we're just working through them. So here tonight, I just wanted to update the potential revisions for discussion tonight. The first being around the vocabulary that in definitions within the policy. You'll see those as highlighted green. First, starting with absence and truancy and the part of the school day and tardiness. These all are cross-referenced to the attendance policy that we actually reviewed twice in recent months because we reviewed it, and then there was more updates, and we reviewed it again. So all these terms are cross-referenced, so that is helpful for our policies. I do just want to highlight, while there's not a lot of changes, there is a annual process for like space determination. Looking at this full-time enrollment, the space, right now, Dr. Siebert and I looked, previously this was done at the Finance and Facility Committee meeting, and maybe it was done there because student services didn't exist, but that could be further conversation that we can have around what committee do we want to have talking about the open enrollment seats and capacity and the space that we have. Further in the policy, it talks about the process that is done. There's a specific form that needs to be used, and we use that throughout our processes here in the school district. Parents are notified the first Friday following the first Monday in June about the determination. So nothing's changed, but I just want to point that out in part of the process. Furthermore, there's been a small edit under C, the criteria for non-resident applicants, and this is related to expulsions, which Mark is very good of being on the open enrollment and looking at kids who have been expelled before, but looking thoroughly into that. So that's just a small tweak. And then as you look further into the policy, there's some information added around termination of the open enrollment and looking at truant and habitually truant. This is a part of our communication when families are open enrolled. And again, goes back to attendance and those key defining what that means and notifying families. The last change that you'll see at the very bottom, you'll see that the word annually is in pink and has a strike through. So previously, it was recommended that this be reviewed annually. Now, the recommendation is to revise it to modify the policy of any changes made as needed throughout the time rather than annually, but when it is revised to bring it prior to the open enrollment window opening. So if that were to happen prior to next year, we'd be bringing it back in November rather than December. So that concludes my update about the possible policy considerations and revisions recommended from Neola. It's just a discussion item tonight, and then we would bring it back next month so we can discuss as needed.
The only question I have on it is under termination of open enrollment, is it a board function to determine whether a student is habitually truant? You know what I mean? I mean, is that a board function? Under policy, it would be, I would think.
We define the truancy and we map it and we spell it out in all of our communication regarding the number of like partial days, what it means to be truant.
Yeah, right. But I'm just wondering, is that a board function to determine, because it says termination of open enrollment. If the board determines that a student is habitually truant, I've never,
Oftentimes it's-
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've never determined whether a student, that's always been an administrative task, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if we should have it as a board task. I mean, is there a policy that says it's a board task, though? You know what I mean?
Yeah, Yeah, we can cross-reference.
I mean, because that's an administration, I mean, Mark was talking about how they monitor that and then, and then they determine, you and student services actually determine, or at the school level, if whether it's habitually truant.
Yep, we can cross-reference.
Okay, I was just wondering.
No, I think
Because,
that's a good
I mean, and then you refer them to truant court then, right?
We can, depending on.
Right.
What,
But that's also an administrative function because the board doesn't refer students to truancy court. So I was just wondering if that is just, you know, a misnomer in there. Then maybe if student services determines, or I don't know what words you would use in there.
Or not even saying who's making the
Yeah,
determination.
or not even
If a
saying
student
who's
is
making the
determined,
decision,
you know,
just to
has been
make it,
determined to
right,
be habitually truant.
Right.
And not say whose job it was to make it happen.
yeah, for sure. Something like that, I think that would have to be reworked, because I've never had that function, never.
As a board member.
By the time, yeah, we find out that they're habitually truant, it's usually an expulsion hearing. So. Mr. White?
Yeah. Thank you. So looking at the same section on termination of open enrollment, outside of a student actually being expelled, going through an expulsion process in our district as an open enrolled student, are there any other causes for termination of open enrollment during a school year? Is there anything else that would trigger? And since we spelled it out for truancy, do we need to identify any of those things in here as well? Or is truancy truly the only thing that we could use as a reason to remove someone through open enrollment outside of the disciplinary process?
yes.
It is? Okay.
And you'll see too the word semester, which that is in state statute. And I know that the principals and I have had several conversations around that. Because honestly, with the definition of truancy, you could, I don't know, by October be truant, habitually truant, and then you're waiting until semester ends in January. And then you're talking about attendance being such a positive piece of student engagement and partnership with families and students. So that makes it difficult, but that is in the state statute, at semester. And I think that's in the best interest of kids from one perspective, so that they're not bouncing around,
Right.
by quarter. But it does make it challenging, because then we're continuing to provide efforts to engage them, get them to school when they've already shown that they're habitually truant.
Right. Mr. White?
Yeah, so then moving on, and this isn't a change in the policy, but I'd like to understand the policy a little bit better. So section 4 talks about, and this falls under the section on decisional criteria. Talks about whether the special education program or related services described in the non-resident's IEP are available in the district. So I believe I heard at one time, and perhaps this was, I had an incomplete understanding. My understanding was we do not bring any students with existing IEPs into the district through open enrollment. Is it more nuanced than that? Is it a decision truly based on whether those services are available, or do we just not open enroll IEP students into the district?
I would say at first is based on our process of space.
Okay,
So how much space is available? That's the very first step. And as you know, our special education numbers are increasing. Our special education teachers are very hard to find. And we have, year after year, many districts have no space.
right.
For anyone with an IEP to open enroll. That being said, doesn't mean a family wouldn't open enroll, be accepted, and at some point have an IEP evaluation and then qualify.
That was gonna be my follow-up then. So in that situation, we keep the student in for the remainder of the year, and then reevaluate the following school year, or how does that?
We typically, like other districts, keep the student. And then what we do is we engage the homeschool for IEP conversations. And then ultimately have conversations with family. For some families, they need transportation.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense. I mean, there's a variety of factors. But our practice is not, once you are identified as needing an IEP, that your open enrollment is nullified.
So then the final piece of this, and you were starting to allude to it, was the discussion with the home district. Does the home district provide any additional funding in terms of the tuition transfer for students that are identified as IEP to cover those costs? Or do we then bear the full financial responsibility for the IEP services that we provide for an open enrolled student who's identified once they're in the district?
Probably goes back to the third Friday count, when they were identified and when they're in our district as to the dollar amount. So on a third Friday count, and jump in or if you want, but the third Friday count, if they were identified as a student with a disability, that is different financially for the district compared to another student.
Right. But if we're past that third Friday count, let's say we identify it
Absorb it.
in October, we have to absorb that for the remainder of the school year. And then we can redecision the following school year if that student wants to open enroll again?
Yeah, we typically keep them.
Okay,
We absorb the cost.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions about the policy? Excellent. Thank you very much. Good discussion. All righty. Next up is under other business recommendations for future meetings. Does anybody have anything that they would like put on the agenda? If you think of anything, please email myself and Jen, and we will get it on the agenda. Meeting adjourned. Thanks much.
Thanks.